and this will also be transcribing the meeting for our note-taking purposes. Okay. All right, well, let's get started. I'd like to welcome everyone for tonight's meeting about proposed traffic calming for Springbrook Drive. My name is Glenn Gower. I'm the City Councillor, and I'll introduce you to a few of the people who will be sharing information and answering questions with us tonight. We have Louay Mustafa, Karam Safa, and Azmat Perveen. All three are part of our traffic safety team at the city and work with us on all sorts of traffic calming, traffic safety, and road issues in Stittsville. And behind the scenes, you can't see them, but we have Fuad Sayed, who's also with the traffic team at the city, and Catherine Musgrove and Amelie Bell from my office, who are assisting tonight. So thanks all of you for being here. And thank you to residents for taking the time to tune in tonight. We've had a lot of feedback on this so far. What we're hoping to do this meeting is give you an overview of what's being proposed. And then as an outcome, we really want to make sure we're answering any questions you may have. So there is a Q&A function on the screen that you can use for that. We're also looking to collect any feedback or comments that you have, and capture any action items. We find often in these meetings there's other questions or issues that arise. So if there's any action items coming out of that, we'll capture that too. And we will provide a summary of all this on my website within a few days after the meeting. So with that, we'll start into the presentation deck here. So as a bit of background, we've had over the years a number of resident concerns about road safety and the need for improvements on Springbrook Drive and Trailway in the Amberwood community. I'm using Springbrook throughout this presentation because most of where the recommended traffic calming are really on the Springbrook, the north end of the street, but Springbrook and Trailway are kind of one continuous street in a way. So when I say Springbrook, it applies to Trailway as well. There's lots of pedestrians in this area, a lot of older adults in this area. In recent years, we've seen more and more vehicles traveling to and from Sacred Heart High School. There was a petition submitted by residents in September 2022 asking for more police enforcement of speeding on Springbrook. I just collected here from the past couple of years some of the examples of feedback we've received from residents in the Amberwood area about speed and safety specifically on Springbrook. So I won't read through them all, but I want to just leave them on the screen for you all to read. There is a lot of concern in the neighborhood, and certainly not everyone speeds, but for drivers who are speeding, it's really creating a sense of danger, and that the neighborhood isn't a safe place to cross the street, to walk with children, and a lot of concern from residents that we continue to hear. So some traffic calming measures are already in place along Springbrook. For example, there are the speed display boards. These are the boards that display the speed of vehicles as they approach, and those are measures that are in year-round. There's also flex stakes, which are the tall vertical signage that go right in the middle of the road, and those are in place from April to October, so those are visible in a few locations. And then there's additional signage that's been put up to alert people to pedestrian crossing or seniors in the neighborhood, so additional warnings and reminders to drivers to slow down. I really like this diagram because it shows the importance of speed and of driving the speed limit. This is a chart that demonstrates the likelihood of survival for pedestrians if they're struck by a vehicle traveling at 30 kilometers an hour, 50 kilometers an hour, and 65 kilometers an hour. So the outcome at 65 kilometers an hour is obviously not good. The outcome at 50 kilometers an hour, 5 out of 10 pedestrians would be expected to survive on average. At 30 kilometers an hour, 9 out of 10 pedestrians survive. And I think it's data like this, it's probably pushing a lot of jurisdictions Not in North America yet, but certainly in European countries to move to a 30-kilometer-an-hour standard. And we are seeing some neighborhoods in Montreal, Toronto, and even in central Ottawa that are starting to move to 30 kilometers an hour. But typically in Stittsville, residential streets are signed at 40 kilometers or 50 kilometers an hour. So we have done a speed study on Springbrook. There was one done in July 2021, and it was a speed study conducted between Deer, Moss, and Torrey Pines, where the posted speed limit is 40 kilometers an hour. And when we do these speed studies, they're done over a 24-hour period. And they measure the speed of every vehicle that's passing by the speed measuring device. And what's calculated is the 85th percentile speed, which is the speed at which drivers are traveling at or below. And ideally, we want to see this value as close to the posted speed limit as possible. So in this case, we would want to see a value of the 85th percentile speed as close to 40 kilometers as possible. And it's a way that we use to measure how effective traffic calming measures are, a way to measure how many people are complying with the speed limit, and it helps in our decision making as to where we might want to install additional measures to keep the speed down. So the speed study results from that study. Southbound, the 85th percentile speed was 51 kilometers an hour, and northbound it was very similar, 50 kilometers an hour. Now the average speed was 44 kilometers an hour, and I wanted to include that because people often ask about that. We don't use the average speed in these calculations because the 85th percentile speed gives us a better idea of what most drivers are typically driving at. So, and it's what we use as a comparator from street to street to understand speed. So at 50 or 51 kilometers an hour, that means the 85th percentile speeds are 25% above the posted speed limit. So that means it does qualify for traffic calming and a higher standard of traffic calming measures. So what is being recommended is this street would be appropriate for the installation of speed humps or speed cushions. We'll get to that terminology in a moment. Up to 7 potential locations. So we've mapped out where those 7 locations of the humps or speed cushions would go. We're going to go through that as well. This would be implemented through our Stittsville Ward temporary traffic calming budget, either in this year or next year. And the typical costs of speed humps can be $15,000 to $20,000, which includes all the materials and installation and signage and all of the preparatory work around that. The final design gets reviewed by emergency services, public works, and OC Transpo. And this is part of the process too, getting feedback from residents to understand if where the concerns are, if there are major feedback for or against. We're looking at potentially 4 or 5 different locations, different streets in Stittsville where we might do an installation, and we are still narrowing that down. So this is by no means confirmed or final, and this feedback gathering and the final review by the other agencies is part of the process before we finalize where these locations might be over the next year or two. So just on terminology, this is a speed hump. And it's not a speed bump, it's a speed hump. I think the best way I could explain it would be it's a little more gentle than a speed bump, not quite as jarring. There are speed bumps, the closest ones would be speed humps, like this one, are on Fringewood Drive, and they were installed a couple of years ago. Fringewood Drive between Hazeldean and Harry Douglas. And if you're driving through there, you do have to slow down a bit if you're going above the 40 kilometer an hour limit, but they're different than a speed bump, which is a lot more jarring, where you really have to push the brakes on. So these are just designed to be a gentle way to bring vehicle speeds down to 40 kilometers or below. And then the other thing I mentioned was the speed cushions. There's not as many of these in place. In Canada, there's some on Knudsen Drive in the Beaverbrook neighborhood, And they're similar to the speed cushions, but as you can see, they're sized so that a larger bus or fire truck has an easier time getting over them, and in fact would not have to would not have to slow down very much at all as they're going over them. Normal or regular personal vehicles would have to slow down, but wider vehicles would not have to do that. And that's an option sometimes we look at under the advice of emergency services or OC Transpo. So I'll just go over the potential locations. And these are locations that have been mapped out because they're not blocking driveways, they're not blocking intersections, there is space to install the necessary signage, and there's appropriate sight lines. But there may be issues that residents see that our traffic team hasn't seen or that I haven't seen. You're the folks who live in this neighborhood. So if there are concerns or questions you have about where these are located, we definitely would like to hear from it. So we're going to go kind of from north to south. This first one that's circled here is between the entrance of Camelback Court and Spyglass Ridge. So this is just after you come by the island coming off of Hazeldean Road. And approaching the entrance to Spyglass and then the parking lot. The second location would be right in front of the Amberwood Golf Course parking lot. If we keep going, heading further south from the golf course, there's one just past Oak Fern Court. That's labeled as number 3. And continuing down to number 4, just past Arbor Ridge and Bay Hill Ridge is number 4. And then a little bit past Bay Hill and Torrey Pines, you've got location number 5, bit of a straight section there. Number 5 is shown again on this slide. And then number 6, as we head a little bit further south, heading towards the, or I guess just past the mailboxes, number 6. And then the 7th location is just south of Eagle Rock, between Eagle Rock and the next intersection, I believe, is Trailway Circle there. So we have had some feedback so far from residents. Questions about what studies have been done to measure speed. And I should add that we are going to be doing an additional study this spring just to see how the speeds compare to the last one that was done in 2021. Some of you have identified additional problem spots, so a concern about speed near Paul Lindsay Park, the crossing at Springbrook and the Trail Hill intersection, Moss Hill intersection, a lack of a safe pedestrian crossing at the golf course and at the Trailway Springbrook intersection, and then concern about how speed humps would interact with the emergency vehicles and snowplows and so on. So I know we've covered some of that here, but certainly if you have any additional questions, we've got the experts here who can help answer them. So with that, I do want to go to questions and comments. And we have a Q&A panel, and I know there's some questions that have already come in, some comments and some questions, which is great. I think as a participant, you can also raise your hand. Now, we're kind of new to this platform, so I'm not entirely sure how that will show up. But if you wanted to just ask your question rather than a Q&A, I do think you can raise your hand. But we'll start with some of the Q&A questions as they've come in here. So the question is, wondering why the proposed speed bumps are concentrated on the Springbrook Drive end. There is considerable speeding down Trailway Circle, especially from parents picking up students at the Sacred Heart High School, and we need at least 2 on either side of Trailway to solve this problem. I can start that, and Louay or Karam, you may have some additional info you want to add. We have been looking specifically at the north part of the road for a couple reasons. One is we find that there's a lot more seniors and older adults who are in that area and crossing the road specifically with all of the condo cul-de-sacs and so on. It tends to be where we see the most pedestrian traffic and the most crossing. As you head further south, there is a crosswalk that's already installed in front of Paul Lindsay Park, And because you have a straight section further south, it allows us to put in the speed display signs. Whereas further north, Springbrook is a very curvy road, and we don't have the distance or the a straight enough roadway to be able to put in measures like the speed boards or even the centerline flex stakes. So we don't have as many traffic calming options in the north part of Springbrook, and that's one of the reasons why we focus on that part in particular. I don't know if Louay and Karam, if you had any other comments.
Thank you, Counselor. Yeah, I think you touched on everything that we would say about to answer that question. Like you said, the golf course, the condo buildings, the nature of the road are the main sort of focus points of why we kind of are looking at the north side as opposed to the southern end of the road.
Okay, thank you. It's a good question. It's a good question, and certainly, I mean, we could look at additional locations. It could be in another phase. It could be part of this phase as well. So appreciate the feedback on that. We had an anonymous user say, I sent detailed comments in 2 emails, which I hope you can read and speak to. So we received a lot of emails on this. So I'd encourage folks, if you have something specific you'd like us to answer or address on this call, just type in a quick question to the Q&A and we will try to get to it here. Next question would be, beyond anecdotal, is there data about the volume of traffic and how much of that traffic volume is driving at excessive speeds? Have you quantified the problem? I don't know if Louay or Karam, if you can answer that
Absolutely,
one.
yeah. I can jump in. So maybe I can explain how we collect data first, just to give people a sense of how we do that. So we put up automated traffic recorders out on the road. You may have seen them. They're like these tall posts with the infrared boxes that pick up data as they kind of drive, as vehicles drive by it. We place the equipment out for 24 hours. We collect all readings within that 24-hour period. And essentially, we pick up the 85th percentile data, which Counselor touched upon in the slides, as well as the average speed to kind of give us an indicator on what speeding looks like or what the speeding patterns are. In terms of this specific study, we placed it 24 hours on the road, and we picked up about 3,000 readings of vehicles driving throughout that portion of the road. And basically, the data that you see is from the readings of that automated traffic recorder. I don't know if that answers the question, but we have about 3,000 vehicles that went through that time period. About 1,500 in each direction. The northbound actually a little bit less than the southbound. Um, but that summarizes sort of the volume aspect of it. And then the 85th percentile speed is the speed that we typically touch up or use to give us the best indicator of what the operating speeds look like along that road.
Is 3,000 vehicles over 24 hours? How does that compare to other streets? Is that high, low, normal? I don't know. I don't know how to assess that.
Yeah, it's fairly in line with that type of road. Collectors typically carry higher volumes than local roads, and Springbrook is a collector road. So it's about the average of what we typically see on that type of road.
Okay. 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 The next, I guess it's a comment. I see the cyclists on Fringewood also have to go over the speed hump. Not great for promoting cycling. Okay. So that's a comment. Thank you. Um, Next question. Because Trailway is an actual circle, won't traffic just take the other way around to avoid the speed humps? The problem would just be shifted to another street. So maybe I'll ask the traffic folks, is that how much diversion do speed humps do, and any comments on that?
Yeah, I'm not sure I entirely sort of understand the question here. The sort of the southern end of Springbrook Trailway is a circle. Um, there is sometimes you would see some diversion when we put some speed bumps, along a specific roadway, but the majority of those you see when you have a parallel road that kind of runs in parallel with the road where we're putting a speed hump. In the case of Springbrook, I don't see anything that would sort of be an alternative to Springbrook to get out of that community. And sort of typically people look for the shortest route to get to from point A to point B, right? And so in this case, to be able to reach Hazeldean, Springbrook is sort of the only road that kind of runs in the same sort of direction that Springbrook does. Other than sort of that, I don't see sort of any diversions happening to any other street to kind of follow that pattern.
Okay. Next question. Paul Lindsay Park would be a good choice to slow people picking up students at Sacred Heart. That's from Jack, who lives on Shady Branch Trail. Okay, noted. Thank you. Thank you, Jack. By the way, apparently the raise hand function is not working, so apologize for any confusion there. But you can use the Q&A, and there's lots of questions and comments coming in. Do you think that the Paul Lindsay crosswalk is working? I find that drivers are very respectful of my crossing. My opinion, I think crosswalks are inconsistent in how drivers treat them. I think most drivers are fairly respectful and are looking out for pedestrians, but I know a lot of drivers are not paying attention, whether they're driving too fast or driving distracted or just aren't paying attention. I find a lot of drivers do not stop for pedestrians at crosswalks. I think there is a review being done citywide around crosswalk design, like signage and pavement markings. Does that ring a bell, Louay? Do you know anything about what's involved in that?
That would be through the PXO group, our folks in the PXO group. I'm not entirely sure, or I don't have all the information on that review, unfortunately, but we can certainly, if people are interested in finding out more information, we can get in touch with our colleagues at PXO and get some more information.
Okay, okay. Thank you. Um, a question, just in process. You asked for comments in advance. Are you asking us to state all of that again here in the message box? No, we're not. We certainly have all your comments. So we were collecting comments from people as one way to collect feedback. This presentation is another way that we can collect feedback. So if you've already emailed us comments that you want us to be aware of, we have those, and we will be responding to those and providing updates. But if you have additional questions or would like some clarity on anything that we are presenting today, by all means, you can enter that into the Q&A. And even beyond today, if you have any questions or comments, you can send us that by email as well. So we're going to be collecting comments for a couple weeks after this as well. Another comment on that Paul Lindsay Park crosswalk. I have seen many drivers not bothering to stop for pedestrians at the crossing near Paul Lindsay Park. So thank you. There's another comment. You seem to be focusing on straight sections. I feel the curved sections with restricted visibility due to trees on the boulevard, mostly the northern section immediately upon entering Springbrook from Hazeldean. Have you considered the high risk there? Thank you for that. Any comments, Karam or Louay, in terms of that section right south of Hazeldean?
Thank you, Counselor. Yeah, so the reason is we pick the we try to pick the straight line is the visibility issue because the drivers need to see the speed hump signs, so we don't need to surprise them with a speed hump. So we try to be away as possible from the curve itself.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we try to be more visible for the drivers. And also in the curve, usually people slow down, so it will lose the purpose of the speed hump.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm just watching. Okay. So here's a comment and some questions. I had a concern regarding the level of safety achieved with speed bumps or humps versus other measures such as increased enforcement, speed cameras, and so on. And then why do we not have more speed traps? What is the impact to emergency response times, especially in light of the older population in this area? And then cost considerations. Could this be instead used for snowplow with the driveway gate? Okay, so that's a snow clearing question. So yeah, so maybe take these one at a time. So compared to other measures, how effective are speed bumps and speed humps, or speed cushions rather, in reducing speed compared to some of the other measures?
Yeah, so we know they're very effective because they add a physical element to the road, right? They add a physical element that forces drivers to slow down, right? And that's sort of the main focal point of why drivers tend to slow down as they sort of navigate the road and specifically the areas where the speed humps are, right? So typically, they are very effective because you have to sort of slow down as you reach the speed hump to be able to navigate them at certain speeds. So that's the main reason of why they are effective.
There's also the question of cost effective, which is maybe a little more difficult to answer, but you know, the center line flex stakes that we have currently on Springbrook are relatively inexpensive. They do tend to bring speeds down by 5 kilometers an hour to 10 kilometers an hour. Um, which is good, but obviously there's drawbacks to those as well. They're seasonal. I know they're not very popular for a lot of drivers. A lot of drivers have difficulty navigating through them, although that's kind of the point. You have to slow down to navigate through. They're not the best solution for pedestrians and cyclists, but they do slow down vehicles. But I think any measures has pros and cons. The speed humps and speed cushions are more expensive, but they're permanent and do work fairly well. Um, this question on why don't we have more speed traps? Right now, the city has, not sure if you mean police speed traps um, or the automated speed enforcement, the speed cameras that have started to be installed in the last 3 or 4 years. Um, on police, they have uh, I think, changed their approach to traffic enforcement, where they do have a team that does traffic blitzes. They're looking for high-end speeders on highways and on roads like Hazeldean Road or Carp Road. They do blitzes for speed when there's problem areas identified, stop sign blitzes, pedestrian safety blitzes. Um, I think one great way, if you want to see more police coverage, is to make a report on the police website at ottawapolice.ca/report. And what they do is they aggregate all the report data, and if they're seeing certain areas that are coming up more often, they will direct direct resources there. I provide feedback to them as well. On the speed cameras, the automated speed enforcement, right now, for the most part in Ottawa, they are only in school zones. City is piloting some other high speed and high collision zones, but we're limited by Ontario law as to where we can put them. So that's why there aren't more of them. But right now they're going in school zones generally where we see the least compliance with the posted speed limit. And then the question about, do speed humps or speed cushions, do they impact emergency response times? Is that a major issue?
So we do have, they call it key emergency routes for the fire department. Springbrook is not part of it. But in general, any permanent measure will a little bit impact the response time, but it's not like a big difference. And as I said, Springbrook is not a key emergency route, so it's, you know, it's not really it's going to affect much because they don't use it quite often. Um, but again, like the speed humps are are easy. It's not like as the counselor said, it's not really like a speed bump, so it's not very hard for the drivers or for the vehicles in general.
And then, as we mentioned before, too, that emergency services review any proposed traffic calming. So
Correct.
they would have to be okay with it. In fact, we've had locations where we would like to do it that has been rejected because it is a major road for emergency services. Okay, thank you. A comment, the study would not give a true reading of traffic numbers as it was undertaken during the summer when school traffic is not passing through the area. I suppose that's accurate. So we are doing a follow-up study in the spring of this year. We don't do traffic studies in the winter because of the winter conditions, but once that snow is melted, the way and Karam and their team are out there doing that. So we'll have some refreshed data in the spring that we can share. Okay. Next comment is regular walkers in the area. We agree a crosswalk at the golf course would be helpful, but it's not just about the golf course. People walk through to Stittsville, Maine here. It's also worth noting that in the winter, the golf course parking lot can only be accessed by the further entrance which crosses to the bus stop, as snowbanks on the opposite side of the closer entrance are mostly impassable. Okay, thank you for that. We've noted that. Comments from Joseph, who says he's been in the village, in Amberwood Village, for 28 years. So a veteran resident. Says, I'm going to paraphrase this a little bit in the interest of time. Says, I appreciate the city and its staff for proposing traffic safety measures in Amberwood Village. There are many ways to reduce traffic speed, some of which have been implemented in Amberwood, such as the speed radar signs. So some comments. Speed bumps are not the only solution to speeding. There are other solutions. And mentions 3 negative issues with speed bump: vehicle wear and tear with repeated crossing over the speed bumps. So wear and tear on the underside of vehicle suspension systems and so on. Property values. Installation of speed bumps can have mixed effects on property values and community satisfaction. Some residents may appreciate reduced traffic speeds and enhanced safety. Others may find them a nuisance and an inconvenience, hence their impact on property values. And then emergency response delays, which I know has come up a couple times here. So it can affect the outcome in emergency situations. So, and a suggestion, he says, I believe creating bike lanes to narrow the street will give us 2 benefits. It will make our street bike friendly and the narrowing will reduce the speed. So he says speed bumps are not the solution. If you proceed, you'll reduce the value of our homes, ruin our cars, and endanger our elderly. So thank you. Thank you, Joseph. We're getting a range of feedback, pro and con, on this, so appreciate your comments. Question, what was the excess speed recorded the last time data was collected? I'm not sure exactly what you mean by excess speed, but the 85th percentile speed was 51 kilometers an hour in one direction and 50 kilometers an hour in the other direction. So at least 10 kilometers over the speed limit. A comment, intersection of Springbrook and Torrey Pines is quite dangerous. Cars speeding around the curve. Thank you for that. Intersection of Spyglass Ridge and Springbrook. There's no way to cross Springbrook without walking on Springbrook because the sidewalk on the east side of Springbrook, residents are obligated to walk 100 yards south before they can cross to the sidewalk. Often we hear about cars honking at residents just trying to get to a location where they can cross safely. Is it possible to put crosswalk lines? So good question. That's from Don. Thank you, Don. I think we've seen a lot of questions about crosswalks. I think if this neighborhood, if Springbrook and Trailway were designed today, you'd probably see crosswalks on both sides and maybe even a bike path on one or both sides. And you would see crossing points. One of the challenges we have is to do a crosswalk. We have to have appropriate accessibility infrastructure, which means basically a sidewalk or partial sidewalk on both sides of the street, so that when someone's crossing, they're not crossing to a curb, so they're not crossing into the middle of the road. And unfortunately, the way that Springbrook is configured right now, with the sidewalks only on one side, it aside from a very few spots where there's a pathway, there are not a lot of options. And now we are looking at crosswalk in a couple of locations, for example, at the Trailway intersection. So we're doing some evaluation there to see if it will qualify and if there's funding that's available for it. So it is a possibility in the future. But unfortunately, there's not many locations that meet the accessibility requirements at this time. So we'll keep going on here. Really good questions. Thank you, everybody, for sending these. Okay. I moved to Amberwood Village at the end of June 2024. My typical day includes 4 to 5 walks per day with my dogs. I've noticed the worst times along Springbrook are between 6 and 9 a.m. and the next worst is after 8 p.m. Although I don't like speed humps, I fully support all 7 of the locations suggested. I have seen a centerline post hit this winter, and I have seen a car going what appeared to be well over the limit and slide into the snowbank at the curve between Old Orchard and Torrey Pines. Okay, thank you for that. And welcome to the neighborhood. Clearly, Springbrook 40 years ago was not designed as a collector road. New collectors seem to have sidewalks on both sides. Is this out of the question? I can say it's not impossible, but it's extremely expensive because of the infrastructure involved. And a lot of that's around construction of the sidewalk and all of the accessibility features. Also, the additional stormwater drainage that would be required. So it's a challenge. Springbrook, we have looked at it, but so far it's not on a near-term list for any upgrades, but definitely agree with residents. It would be something that would be great to have along Springbrook in the future, but right now, cost prohibitive, unfortunately. Comment, please include bicycles in your discussions of traffic calming. Cyclists are riding on the sidewalks because some feel unsafe on the road, therefore endangering pedestrians. Can you comment on the idea of a bi-directional bike lane separated with flex stakes? Let's reclaim our streets. Louay or Karam or Asmat, any comments on that idea?
Well, we'd have to look at the roadway width. We'd have to look at other characteristics to see if we can introduce bike lanes separated by flex stakes. It's certainly a possibility for sure. But yeah, we'll have to do sort of a full investigation as to, what are the lane widths? How would the bicycle facility look? Do we have enough space? Volumes of cyclists using Springbrook and some of those sort of characteristics to be able to determine the appropriate sort of cycling facility along Springbrook.
Okay.
Speeding is also a factor that we take into consideration.
It came up earlier, and I don't think I asked any of you to comment on it, but there was a question about cyclists and speed humps and safety for cyclists. Are there any general comments on how what impact they have on cyclists?
We don't have anything sort of quantifiable or measurable in terms of concerns cyclists going over speed humps. They have to navigate it safely, as do vehicles. Do they impact cycling throughout the roads? I mean, they will have some impact, but is it extensive enough to say it's not appropriate for the cyclists? We can't really speak to that without really measuring sort of the impacts across the city of what speed humps, and it's not something that really comes up often, if that makes sense, as an issue. But does it have impacts on cycling? It does. How big of an impact does it have? I can't really say, if that makes sense, without really doing a sort of a comprehensive review of what the impacts are and throughout the city.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Next question is the main priority to slow vehicles down or to prevent fatalities? I kind of feel like saying it, well, both. Maybe slowing down first, because slowing down would make it easier to cross the street, would prevent fatalities in the unfortunate circumstance that someone was hit or serious injury as well. I mean, we definitely want to slow vehicles down and the benefits flow from slower speeds, but I don't know, Asmat or Louay or Krem, if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I can jump in here. Yeah, so yeah, you put it well in the presentation, Counselor. So speeding, the higher speeds, the higher chance of a fatality, right? Um, we know that slowing down vehicles reduces that risk, just to put it sort of in a basic
Okay.
term.
Okay. Thank you. Next question is, do the existing speed indicators gather data, or are these just for show to the drivers? And they do gather data. The radar on them is not as accurate, so we don't necessarily rely on that for measurements when we're considering traffic measures. But I can say the data generally is showing similar or even higher average speed or 85th percentile speeds than what our staff have measured. So we do have access to that data, and they do show people are speeding in those locations. They also show, though, that they're effective in lowering speeds. So the speed that people enter the zone compared to once they get that feedback on the sign does make them slow down to some degree. Not every driver, though. Some drivers see it as a challenge to speed up, but yeah, so we do have that data. Next question. There's a lot of pedestrian traffic into the golf course with the swimming pool, day camps, pickleball, fitness classes. Would a pedestrian crossover be considered for this location along with the speed hump or other deterrent speeding? And I'll say yes. And it's not going to be this year, but it is something that we're considering in a future year. The challenge again would be there's not a sidewalk or pathway on the golf course side. So right now that's a roadblock, although there's a potential in the future to put a pathway through the hydro corridor. So that's one possibility that could lead to a crosswalk, a pedestrian crossover near the golf course. Stay tuned, more to come on that one. Question, although Springbrook is a collector street, maybe it's time to post the street as local traffic only. Could that be done?
Sorry, Counselor, I missed the question. What was the
Oh,
question? I'm scrolling through the questions.
Springbrook is a collector street. Could it be possible to post the street as local traffic only?
The sign really isn't really, it's not effective. We can't enforce it. Local traffic only. Typically, we don't even post it within the city of Ottawa anymore as a sign, but typically in the past it's been used to on streets where there is no option to get sort of to from one community to another. Basically, sort of to say there is no opportunity to cut through this road. In the case of Springbrook, it's a collector road that leads to many sort of points within the community. It's not sort of one street that connects with between two sort of communities. So it's not sort of something that we post to, and at the same time, even if we do post it, it's not something that can be enforced by OPS as a measure. And the city does not install that type of sign because it really has no benefit to it anymore.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, as a connector roadway, Springbrook is used by heavy truck traffic cutting through over the speed level to housing developments off Shea Road. Is there any way these truck numbers could be reduced? That's an interesting question because trucks should probably not be using Springbrook unless they are making local deliveries. And a couple things residents could do if you see trucks. One is you could report it to Ottawa Police because it's Ottawa Police responsibility to enforce trucks that are not using appropriate routes. Also, if you happen to see the name on that truck, if it's a large truck and you see company name on the side, if you can collect any information, send it to me. Sometimes a quick call to the company, and that can often be an effective way to get the companies to encourage their drivers to not use those roads. But with a few exceptions, there should not be heavy trucks using Springbrook whatsoever. Okay, so speed bumps, humps, signage means nothing to the speeders. Instead, those who respect the need to drive carefully are punished for having to negotiate all these road obstacles. At $15,000 to $20,000, police enforcement would bring in speeders and money to the city. Why is Trailway the focus of this discussion? I run through this area all the time. I have never seen a speeder. Um, so clearly someone with influence is getting his or her wish where none is required. Worse speeding is all over River Oaks and all the delivery drivers. This goes on for a bit, but I think thank you for the comments. I think the gist of it is this is not necessary, not a good expense of money, and there's not speeding. So um, I can address that when we get complaints from residents, whether it's from 5 residents or 25 residents, we do have a process where we evaluate speed through speed studies and try to understand whether or not cars are actually speeding and to what degree. And when we see an 85th percentile speed that is 10 kilometers or more over the posted speed limit, that's usually a signal to us that there's a problem, and we look at ways that we can address that, whether it's through speed humps, whether it's through uh, speed display boards, whether it's through flex stakes, whether it's through other measures, whatever might be most appropriate. And in this case, we have 5 potential locations where in the next year or two, we may do speed humps um, if budget permits. And so Springbrook is one of those locations because it is one of the uh, one of the problem spots in the community where we have a significant amount of neighbor concern and data that shows there is a lot of speeding. But certainly we are taking feedback and ideas, and before we move forward on anything, we are making sure we've gone through and addressed any concerns. So thank you for your comments. Question here: if speed bumps are closer than 1 meter to the curb, you will make a huge barrier to cyclists. This is not forward thinking. Can anyone comment on the design and impact on cyclists?
So, so usually the speed humps is about a half a meter from the curb. Um, as Luay was saying, is it going to impact the cyclist? Yes, maybe a little bit. Like I'm not sure how fast the cyclists usually, you know, on the road, but the speed humps itself, it's about 4 meters wide, so it's not like the speed bump where they will fly. So it will kind of help, it's impact the cyclist, it's if especially if they want a straight line and no humps and nothing. But again, I think reducing the speed of the drivers will even help the cyclists to feel a little bit safer to, be on the road. Uh, because you can't really drive, more than 30, 40 kilometers on the speed humps because it will damage the vehicles eventually. So that you'll have to slow down. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Karim. Another question from Joseph on bikes again. Is a bike lane an option to reduce speeds?
Yeah, it definitely is an option because it creates um, a narrower lane width, right, for vehicles to drive through. So it creates sort of that narrower roads, and it brings vehicles driving in opposite direction closer to each other. So it's definitely something that can be effective in reducing speeds because it impacts driver behavior. From experience, you know, the narrower the road is, the less comfortable it is for drivers to drive or to speed throughout that road. So from speaking from that point, when you're adding this bicycle lane, you're making the lane width smaller and the road less in terms of width. So it definitely impacts how people behave when it comes to driving throughout that neighborhood or road on that road.
Okay, thank you. As a question, I have seen some cities that use chicanes to reduce speed and deter traffic through flow. Have you considered this? So, does anyone want to sort of explain what chicanes would be in this context and how they might work?
So they're like delineators and flex stakes essentially. You create pinch points throughout a road using those chicanes or delineators, which are the vertical sort of sticks that we put into the road. Sometimes we put them in on the center line in the roadway, or we use them to create sort of um, what we call bulb outs, which are essentially pinch points in on a specific road. We paint it into the ground, and then we use sort of delineators to reinforce sort of that pinch point in the road, if that makes sense. So yeah, it's an option that's available as well. But it's only seasonal, right? It's not, it's flex stakes can only be on the road from spring on to sort of end of fall before snowfall. So it's only a seasonal measure. It's not there throughout the year.
Some residents might be familiar in Stittsville, in the older part of Stittsville, Abbott Street between Stittsville, Maine and West Ridge. There are a number of intersections that are narrowed with a pinch point, which is kind of a similar idea, although those are permanent. And that's also something that can be considered. Those tend to be a lot more expensive, though, because of the reconstruction that needs to be done at the curve and considerations around drainage. But it's also a consideration or possibility in the future. A question about the crossover or crosswalk in front of the entrance of the golf course. Could a concrete pad be installed in the grassy area in front of the parking lot, meaning not one to be considered where the hydro corridor would run through? So yes, that's a possibility. We would have to make sure the concrete pad connects to a safe pedestrian area on the other side. But we don't necessarily need a full sidewalk on that side of Springbrook on the golf course side, but you would need to have a concrete landing pad with appropriate accessibility and then something to connect it to a safe place for pedestrians or someone with a wheelchair or mobility device to move to. So definitely a possibility in the future. Yes. Although expensive. Again, all these things, any physical intervention can add up on the price tag quite quickly. Next comment, bike lanes would be appreciated by cyclists of various abilities, elderly and children, to be off the sidewalk but not totally exposed to the live lane. Okay, thank you for that. Maybe if folks are watching and just want to clarify, when you're talking about bike lanes, I mean, there's a wide range. There's a painted lane on the road, which would be like a very minimum intervention. But then there's curb separated lanes as well. That's a little more substantial. So I'm kind of curious where when people say bike lanes, what they're thinking about that. Generally, in the city, when we're looking at new bike infrastructure, it is like a dedicated pathway that's up at curb level and not just a line of paint on the road. And I'm just curious if that's what people had in mind when they're suggesting bike lanes here. A comment, I think based on what I just said, a pinch would be better than a bump. So noted, thank you. I think we've caught up on our question queue. And and a lot of questions coming in. So thank you everyone for sending those. We're coming up on 8 o'clock, so just on the hour. If you have any last minute questions in the next kind of going once, going twice in the next few seconds, by all means, you can share those. Also wanted to remind folks that if you have additional comments or questions, or you want to have a conversation about this, please reach out to me by email, and we'll keep gathering feedback like this. And we do have another question. This might be the last one. Clarifying, wondering specifically about a lane separated with temporary posts as a bike lane. Okay, thank you for clarifying that. So that'd be similar to, say, Iber Road is a spot where we have a bike lane with temporary flex stakes in the summer months. Thank you for clarifying that. I will say those aren't the most popular thing with cyclists. They are perhaps better than just a roadway, but don't always provide the level of separation and sense of safety that a child or a older adult or someone who's not necessarily comfortable on their bike for using. But appreciate clarifying that. Thank you. Well, I just wanted to bring up on the screen before we wrap up, just so everyone has it, this is my email and my phone number. So if you have any additional feedback, or if you're talking to your neighbors and other questions might come up, please send it along. And like I said, we are going to summarize the feedback we've received by email so far and in tonight's meeting, and any additional feedback we get. And we will share that along with this presentation deck on my website in the coming, well, let's say in the coming week or two, as we continue to collect some more feedback, so people have a reference. And then there's no timeline or no schedule right now. We're having these meetings in a number of neighborhoods, so continuing to gather feedback and look at budgets and look at feasibility before we move forward on anything. So I want to say a big thank you to all the residents who took part tonight and asked some great questions and shared some good feedback. Appreciate it. And thank you behind the scenes to Catherine and Amélie and to Fouad. And thank you to Loué and Karam and Asmat from the city for answering questions and being here to answer questions from residents today. And I hope everybody has a good night, and thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.